Hello and welcome back to another Blurbal reasoning on the Cirque du Freak manga edition. Just a little heads up, while this is my first time reading through the manga version of the story, it is also partially a retrospective on the story itself, and therefore there will be full spoilers for this entire series. There will also be partial spoilers for Book 5 of the Demon Artist series by Darren Shan, but I will try to keep that as vague as possible. You'll see what I mean later on. But yes, we're here today to talk about Volume 5 of the Cirque du Freak manga series, which adapts Book 5 of the same series, Trials of Fire, by Darren Shan. The adaptation, of course, done by the magnificent Takahiro Arai. I feel like I downplayed Darren Shan in that intro. Darren Shan, also a tremendous writer. There you go. So, Trials of Death is a direct continuation of the Vampire Mountain story arc, which began in the previous book. Having been presented to the vampire princes, it is decided that Darren will undertake these trials of initiation, which are 5 deadly, terrifying, gruesome, bloody trials of cunning and combatability and wisdom to prove oneself to the vampire clan, but most importantly to Darren, apparently, to himself. There are a few lines in this book where Darren's thinking about, like, am I going to become a vampire of good standing? So it is important to him. There's also a line where he thinks he's going to die and he wonders if he'll be accepted by the vampire gods, which also shows that he has faith in the vampire gods now as well. Darren is becoming more and more in tune with the vampire way of life. I find it quite harsh, but I guess realistic, that most of the vampires are betting against Darren when it comes to his trials of initiation. Like, obviously it's unlikely that he's going to make it through, but to actually gamble and make bets with one another about this young half-vampire's life is kind of mean, dudes. But one of the things I really like about this book, and in particular the manga adaptation of it, is how we can see the tide turning as the book goes on, and we can see more vampires starting to believe in Darren and root for him. Another thing I really enjoy is how this is set against the rising unease about the Vampanese Lord, that prophecy, as well as events unfolding where they found more Vampanese trails on the way up to Vampire Mountain. And so while initially there's a lot of focus on Darren and his trials from the rest of the clan, you can see more and more they start to get distracted, the halls become less busy as he goes to draw his next trial, etc. It's a really fun B-plot to see escalating in the background, and it's a reminder that we're seeing the events of this narrative from Darren's point of view. If this was being told from another vampire's point of view, Darren's trials would probably be the B-plot. But the way Darren Shan, the writer, interweaves Darren's personal plot with the trials of initiation with the Vampanese plot, and what we learn later with Curtis Smolt being behind it, and how those intermingle and reconnect, is really well done. Like, the character of Curtis Smolt is really interesting because he's this really kind and caring character who wants peace and disagrees with so many of the vampire ways, and so he is so taken with Darren's trials of initiation and worrying about him and wanting him to survive that he goes to such great lengths that his kindness undermines his own plans, as at the end of this book they stumble upon the Vampanese that have been hiding away and ultimately uncover Kurda's plot, which is not kind, but is born of that initial kindness of wanting peace. And he's willing, as we'll see in the next book, he's willing to go to great and terrible lengths to establish some form of peace and avert this prophetic disaster. I do love the small hints and bits of foreshadowing we get as to Kurda's true nature as this story goes on as well, like when Kurda faces Arasales during the Festival of the Undead, he beats her by pretending to be injured. He is deceptive, and he beats Ara, this famed warrior who hasn't been defeated in like 12 years, I think it says, on the bars. And while it's not against the rules, it's certainly a bending of the rules, which is something Kurda is very much about. In fact, he uses the bending of the rules to save Darren's life later on, after his trial by fire. When he's too injured to continue, he hatches a plan with the princes to make it so that none of them can attend his trial, but it would be unseemly for them to miss 2 of his trials. So they all decide to, wink wink nudge nudge, they have to postpone it by 72 hours to allow Darren time to heal. So yeah, in these ways, Kurda's true nature as this cunning and deceptive character is shown to us. He also at one point mentions that peace with the Vampanese might require a great sacrifice, but he will do whatever it takes. And that as well is obviously a little hint towards his true motivations. It's the kind of thing where the first time you're reading through you go, oh, okay, and then the second time you go, oh my god, that motherfucker. While we're on the subject of Kurda Smolt, towards the end of a book, when Kurda convinces Darren to run, and he appeals to Darren's, I guess, survival instincts versus his sense of honour, it's very reminiscent to me of Book 5 of the Demonata saga, Blood Beast, and I won't get into specifics because it is a spoiler, but it's not the only time Darren Shan has written about a protagonist feeling ashamed as they give in to wanting to survive and doing something that will put maybe others in danger, in this case Darren putting Larton Crepsley's honour in danger, I guess, because they really want to live against all the odds, against all reason as they see it from their perspective. Anyway, to talk about the trials a little bit, because going into this, despite having reread this series many times, I couldn't remember much about them. So the first trial, the Aquatic Maze, that in the manga version, Takahiro Arai kind of like doing it justice, like making the maze look so big and so impossible to navigate in the right amount of time. I always imagined it as being much, much smaller, and the rock is a bit bigger than I imagined it being as well. The Path of Needles looks like an absolutely excruciating trial to undergo. The pain of having to make sure you're gripping the icicles to, be able to actually cross them, combined with the tension of having to make sure that no stalactites from overhead are going to fall and pierce you through the chest, etc. Honestly, I would prefer my chances in the Trial by Fire, or whatever it's called, compared to that. That being said, the Trial of Fire, the Chamber of Fire, whatever it's called, when Darren draws that, Larton kind of falls a little bit to despair, which is interesting because up until this point, Mr. Crepsley has very much believed in Darren's ability to get through the trials. And of course, it's in this trial that Darren has to leap through a wall of fire to escape being blasted and killed by the fire that's under his feet as he's backed into a corner. And so it's really, well done, I think, in the manga version, just how traumatic this experience is for Darren, and how, he's kind of gibbering mad on the other side, really badly burned, unable to establish reality. And the cruelty of having to persevere and go into the fourth trial despite not being fully healed, even with the extra 72 hours that they managed to bend the rules to allow him. And then, of course, the tragedy of this fourth trial, which Darren has, which is something which you would imagine he would be able to win because he has previous with a wild animal that's been driven mad with Vampanese blood. But this is, of course, the one he fails due to his previous injuries. And he's saved by good old Harkat Moles, who bends the rules, or maybe breaks them, to jump in and save Darren's life, which is, of course, what gets him sentenced to death. It is interesting, I did mention full spoilers at the start. It is interesting knowing that Harkat and Kurda are the same person, and the idea of what it is that makes a person when they've lost their memories, and seeing Harkat's devotion to Darren and trying to save his life against the vampire laws and the vampire way of life, which will ultimately kill him otherwise, seeing as that's also something that Kurda has going on too. A couple more things I noticed on this quote-unquote reread is, for instance, I find it interesting that the vampires call their relationships mating. I know it's meant to harken back to their apparent wolf-like ancestry, but when I think mating, I think making babies, and vampires, as we know, cannot make the babies. I mean, I guess there's a difference between mating and breeding, but I guess I conflate the two in my head. I do like to think that Larton Crepsley and Ara Sales might have rekindled their romance behind the scenes, something that Darren would not be privy to from his point of view. But even he sees them together when he's recovering from his burns and thinks, I wonder if they'll meet again, and I wonder what that would mean for me. Larton would clearly be going through it at this moment in time, and I like to think that he might have turned to Ara, or Ara might have offered him some level of comfort in her loving embrace in the halls of Vampire Mountain, which would make her passing in the next book, which I'm not looking forward to, that much more horrible. Darren Shan, the writer, why must you put us through this? Okay, so to talk specifically about the manga adaptation side of things here. Firstly, I noticed that volume 5 starts with a little bit of a introduction, like, hey, here's what's going on, in case you just, like, picked it up in the shop and was like, I'll start with volume 5. Which I joke about, but I believe Demon Apocalypse was the first Demon Art book I read in the series, which was, yeah, you know, spoilers. Anyway, talking a little bit about that Larten Arrow dynamic, it is done really well in this book, like the slight blushes that they have, the little tender looks they give each other across the panels. Takahiro Arai does a really good job of selling this romance between the two of them, and the idea that Larten very clearly still loves Ara, and Ara very clearly still has feelings for Larten. There's also a really nice cover he drew for one of the chapter covers, which is just Larten and Ara when they were younger, like in high society or whatever, like Ara in a nice dress, Larten in a nice suit, with a little bit of a different hairstyle, and it makes me wish Takahiro would adapt the prequel novels for Larten Crepsley. I believe this chapter art would have been made before the prequel series was a thing, but that being said, it still adapts a scene from, maybe not a specific scene, but it adapts a time period of Larten's life that we know of from the prequels. I like to think that Takahiro was super invested in the story as well, because sometimes he puts a little drawing in the back of the end of volumes talking about his experience adapting the works, and he mentions the side story that's on Darren Shan's website about Gavna Pearl, and the story behind the underwear that his girlfriend gives him. And he even partially adapts it in this wonderful moment where, as Gavner is dying and he's holding a hand up to Darren's cheek and he's apologizing if his snoring has kept him awake. I've always taken that at face value because Darren recently joked about Gavner's snoring, but Takahiro chose to interpret that as Gavner's thinking of a conversation that he had with his girlfriend, and he portrays this by kind of showing a transparent version, like a little, from Gavner's point of view, he's seeing his girlfriend as he's saying that, and it's so tragic, and it makes my heart break for Gavner and you, so thanks for that one, Takahiro. But yeah, I love that he didn't just read the books and adapt them, he got stuck into the story and went to Darren's website and read some behind-the-scenes stuff and read some side story stuff, and even adapted some of that, or used it to influence the way he was adapting the story itself, so just hats off to this guy, he's so good at this. He does talk a little bit about how he had trouble adapting the trials of initiation within the confines of the manga volume, because while the books tend to be the same length, sometimes the events that they describe are more complex or take a longer time. And you can relate that in a smaller amount of words than it would take to draw the panels of. And so I do feel like some of the Trials of Initiation felt a little bit rushed in this edition, but I'm not surprised, and it is kind of more an issue of the medium than it is an issue behind the person adapting it. Takahiro himself mentions that he wishes he was allowed to do multiple volumes per book, and I wish that as well. I don't think he should have been limited to 1 volume per book, because that's not always going to work out as neatly as you might want it to. That being said, I think he still did a brilliant job. I really enjoyed this retelling of Trials of Death. I keep almost saying Initiation because they are the Trials of Initiation which take place within the book Trials of Death, but there we go. But yeah, I remember how in the Aquatic Maze there's talk of like how he would have to endlessly double back on himself, and this idea of the Aquatic Maze taking a lot of time in the book felt like it took a lot of time, whereas in the manga it's really hard to portray lines like, oh, and I had to go back and double back on myself several times, because you just do it in a few panels, and when you're reading through it at the pace with which I read through it, you don't take longer to read those panels. It's hard to explain, but the medium makes it harder to adapt that kind of time. And then with The Path of Needles, we kind of skipped over the training sequence altogether, so while Darren's thinking about the training sequence, he's actually doing the real Path of Needles, and I was there going, wait, this is a bit extreme for training, and it took me a minute to realise, oh no, we've just jumped straight into the trial here. We also kind of skip over the Kurda versus Ara fight in terms of actual panels of the fight happening. all we see is Kurta and Ara go up onto the bars, and then the next page we see the aftermath of that. But if I remember right, that's pretty much the way the fight was described in the book as well. I think it was like, there were only a few lines dedicated to it. But yeah, the events of this novel are a little bit truncated in the adaptive retelling of it, but it's unavoidable. I would still say people reading the manga edition versus the book probably aren't really missing anything important. It's not like if you go and read the Trials of Death novel after reading the manga, you're going to go, wow, there was so much more to this story that was never adapted. That's not the case. Anyway, I've already talked about one of my favourite little flourishes of this adaptation of Trials of Death, which is Gavner seeing his ex-girlfriend as he's dying and talking to her. My other favourite flourish is Kurta does the goddamn thing where when he shows his true colours and becomes a villain, his hairstyle changes, his ponytail just becomes undone in the fight with I guess Gavner. I was going to say the Vampanese, but he wasn't fighting the Vampanese, the treacherous turncloak. And so we see Kurta Smolt with this long flowing hair instead, and it really matches his character. That this shift in hairstyle is a really good visual representation of this shift in who he actually turned out to be. I love it so goddamn much, and I just know that in the next book, when Darren is looking from the bushes and witnessing Lartin searching for him with Kurta's going to be wearing his hair in a goddamn ponytail again. And that is going to represent his duplicity and the secret self that he is hiding. But yeah, that about does it for Trials of Death, the manga adaptation. I'm still really bloody enjoying this. I think I'm going to really bloody enjoy it all the way through, and I'm going to go ahead and read The Vampire Prince. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go do that, and I, in the meantime, will see you in whatever I make next.